morning again. It's so great to be with you. We're wrapping up our series called Life of the Beloved, where we have actually looked at what does it mean to be a person who's real, who follows Jesus Christ. What does that actually look like? Henry Nouwen wrote this book over 25 years ago, and as the world has changed and continues to change so dramatically, still, he takes us to places that are so important for us to go, but maybe for many of us it's a little difficult to go to these places. We talk about this metaphor of bread in his book, Life of the Beloved, which was as a generous gift of a few families we've given to most of the congregation, where Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, and also when he fed the thousands, he took bread, he blessed bread, he broke bread, and then he gave bread. And so this idea of bread being the way that God nourishes us, and it summarizes all of what we need as mortal, vulnerable people in the world God created. We are desperate for bread as the image of all the things that we actually need to survive. And any hope we have is because we've been given so much. Well, that's the idea. And so the very first part of that book, and what we talked about a few weeks ago, was this notion that we are chosen, and we are chosen by a God who loves deeply. Anyone who wants to follow Christ has been drawn to him by the Father, and therefore we can rest assured that when we do trust him, when we do look in his eyes, when we do begin to take seriously that there really is something going on in the world, and that one that made it happen is Jesus Christ himself, God in the flesh, then we can know that he has not only included us and invited us, but he has indeed chosen us. You've been chosen, handpicked, because of God's great love. And then we talked about God took the bread, God blessed the bread. What is a blessing? Blessing is an affirmation of that which is true. Is we can know in our head that we've been chosen, that we're cared about. We can believe that kind of theoretically, but God pours over to us over and over and over his blessings, and what those are is his reaffirmation. You belong to me, so I give you the beauty of the ocean. I give you the wonder of great music. I give you all the blessings of the bread that makes life actually work, reminding us that we do belong to him and we're invited to trust him. Now, that is where most followers of Christ will allow themselves to at least go at least this deep. It's kind of like what we've been doing in this series and in that book. It's like an archaeologist that was kind of wandering in a desert area that nobody paid much attention to, but he noticed something. And he said, hey, something might be there. So he runs to his car and he gets out his little tools. And they're really small tools, very fine, a little brush and maybe a little kind of a pick. And begins to ever so gently wipe away at the surface sand and dirt. And brush it away, and noticing the more he does that, his eyes get wide and he realizes, I've just discovered something. There's something amazing under the surface that nobody seemed to notice. And he runs back and raises all kind of money, builds a team, and spends a lifetime excavating that site, because that site will change the course of human history, the discoveries of this archaeologist. And therefore he would give his life, and men and women would share in that with him by digging away ever so gently and carefully to discover what is underneath the surface. That's why we're reading Life of the Beloved. That's why we've talked about the things we've talked about. Is because all of us know that there's so much buried under the surface. And yet we have been trained and taught to live our lives hard and fast, flying across the top, moving quickly, moving in such a way that we can somehow ignore or pretend or deny that there is more under the surface that perhaps wakes us up at night or causes us to be anxious when there doesn't seem to be a reason to, or when we're desperate, as Brandon's song so beautifully portrayed. We all know that there's deeper and deeper places to go inside of us. And they jump out and bite us constantly, but it's a lot easier just to fly across the surface, especially when we say, I know Christ, I love Christ, I go to church, come on, I'm a good person, here we go. And yet the journey of this relationship with Him goes so deep. It's a lifelong excavation of our soul, and it's a gift. It's not a burden. God has given us the gift of exploring even the darkest nooks and crannies of our soul, where we find the word I used 2 weeks ago is brokenness. We all are through and through filled with cracks and bruises and brokenness. Those places in our soul that we really can't quite justify or reconcile, where we've been hurt and we suffer, maybe by what others have done, maybe what we have perpetuated, maybe how we've responded to the world we have. In so many different ways, we're made aware of these little cracks inside of our soul. And we talked about 2 weeks ago was, these we try to flee, our brokenness we try to push aside, but in reality, we never can. The journey, the life of the beloved is going deeply to those places where we'd really rather not go, where they make us sad or ashamed or nervous or insecure. And yet, that's the brilliance of this book and Henry Nouwen's work and ministry through all his books, is the invitation to go to those places because Jesus knows me inside and out. He knows all those places where I'm wounded, all those places where I'm broken, all those places that I just can't figure out. And He still calls me chosen. He calls me blessed. He says it's not despite your brokenness that I love you. It's because of your brokenness that I have come to restore you, to heal you, to take you to new heights, to give you a whole new life. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ. What a marvelous thing. And now, what does it actually mean to live into that? How do we live into our chosenness, our blessedness, even our brokenness, so that we can be given? Remember, He took the bread, chose the bread, and he blessed the bread, then He broke the bread, and then He gave it to the world. How do we live our lives? This last week, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this later, but this last week, Dee and I were in Seattle during the big snowstorms that we've had. Unprecedented in recorded history, the snowstorms, 4 in a row. And no matter who you listen to or what you read, it's unprecedented in human history, in written history anyway, of the kind of snowstorms they had up there. 4 feet. I'm kidding. That's not true, but it felt like it, even though it was about a foot. And it was kind of miserable. It's cool when you're in Colorado and you're going skiing, you got a lot of dough and you're in a nice chalet, but when the power goes out and your dog looks at you, really, you did this to me. So what do we do? What do you do? The power goes out, then it comes back on, and you try to cook something, and then you watch a movie. Sure, that's what you do. So we watched a couple of movies 2 nights in a row. We're waiting around for our daughter Katie to have a baby. That was why we were up there. And so we watched these 2 movies that both were outstanding movies as films, but they were horrible to watch as Christians because they showed how the world sees us if you are a follower of Christ. It made us look to be idiots and mean and disconnected, most importantly, disconnected from the reality of the broken world we live in. That the world looks at us in a way that says, I want to know what's true, but I don't seem to see it in you guys. What does it mean to live a life where Jesus Christ shines through in a world that is hungry for Him? And that's where we go today. We finish up Life of the Beloved by looking at what does it mean to be given. And so we're going to look at John chapter 6. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this. This was kind of a really important chapter in the Bible because Jesus had fed these thousands of people from the loaves and fishes of one little boy that He had them and miraculously fed them. And when He did, the people ate a lot and they were full. So Jesus and his disciples kind of snuck away to the other side of a lake, and the crowd came to follow him. You know why? Because they wanted more food. They thought this was awesome. So they went and chased after him, and then they and Jesus get in kind of a heated discussion, sort of, in John chapter 6. It's really powerful. We're not going to look at the whole thing, but John chapter 6, starting at verse 25 to verse 37. Then we're going to jump over to John 20:21, one verse I talk about a lot. We'll read that as well. So John 6, if you want to follow along, and I invite you, if you're able, to stand so that God can get our attention and honor him. Verse 25 of John 6. When the crowd found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, but not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate loaves and had your fill. Don't work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval." So they asked him, "What must we do to do the works God requires?" Jesus answered, "The work of God is this, to trust in the one he has sent." So they asked him, "What sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." "Oh, sir, always give us this bread." Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I told you, you've seen me, and still you do not believe in me. All those the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me, I will never drive away. Then over to John 20:21 in the upper room, after Jesus rose from the dead, he said this to his friends, "Peace be with you," John 20:21. "As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God indeed. You may be seated. And I don't say that every week because it's a ritual. I actually think it's kind of amazing. I hope you do too. Bread. Why bread? I mean, Jesus had a lot of metaphors. He calls us light, where the light of who he is shines on us, it shines in us, it shines through us. We reflect that light in how we live. He calls us salt, but we really aren't the salt. He is the salt that pours through us. Then he calls us streams of living water will flow out of us. Living water. We are not the source of the living water. He is, and the water flows through us. You see a theme here. Light, salt, living water all flows through us. But here, he uses bread, because bread represents all of what we need to not only survive, but to thrive. And so, this idea of bread is located right at the center of what God is about. He has come for us to eat of him, to receive him. John 1:12, to all who received him, to all who trusted in his name, he gave the right to become children of God as we receive him. To receive him is to take him in, to be nourished by him, to be healed by him, to be made whole, and to be lifted up by him. So this notion of bread is deeply important and theological. So let's take a look at three things about this. First, this is going to sound trite, okay? It's going to sound obvious, and a bunch of you are going to go, "Oh, way to go, Chap. Okay, you're 2 hours a week in preparation. That's what you came up with? Awesome." That's what this job takes, about 2 hours a week, so it's wonderful. If I actually played a sport, then I would have more time, I guess. So Jesus himself is the bread of life. That's interesting because you go, duh, obvious, he's the bread of life. Yeah, I know that. I've heard it. It's in the Bible. Sure. In fact, him being the bread of life is something that most of us would say, I get it in my head. So when we live our lives, waking up in the morning, trying to figure out how to make sense of it, how to get somebody to notice me, how to be valuable, how to perform my way into blessing, moving on the surface of life, especially if I somehow connect myself to Christ, then I can say as I fly through, he is the bread of life. Isn't that awesome? And I know him. But to simply say he is the bread of life, and even to say we know him, but do we really? Look at what these two verses, John 6:35-36 in the Message say. The same verses we read, but in the Message version. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. The person who aligns with me hungers no more and thirsts no more ever. I've told you this explicitly because even though you have seen me in action, you don't really believe me. Every person the Father gives me eventually comes running to me. Thomas Merton wrote a book called No Man is an Island, and he says this, we cannot find him unless we know we need him. Are you hungry? Are you hungry for the bread of life? Do you find yourself wrestling with the idea of, I'm working so hard to do this on my own, but I need him so much. I seek him out. I want to find him. I want to receive him. I want to know him. And I want to take him in as the life that changes me. Are you hungry? That Jesus is the bread of life means that's really the first step. If we really want to live a life that's authentic and integrated and makes us whole and sets our feet alight, we just can't help but dance. We need to receive him as the bread of life, the bread of our life. That's an important question, and it's a lifelong excavation. It's not just something we kind of believe. It's something that we go to different layers. So in the Life of the Beloved series in the book, if you've explored this at all, some of you are just beginning to go to the upper layers of the excavation project. Others have dug pretty deep, but you know that there's always more and more layers to go. Some of you have actually been driving along the desert and didn't even think anything was out there. And maybe just to know Jesus, it's not bad to start by realizing this is about a lifelong project of excavating the soul, of diving deep. How hungry are you for Jesus Christ? Because he calls you his own. That's the first thing about bread. Now, what's our role in being given away? So if he's the bread of life, he wants all the world to know he's the bread of life so that they can feast on the bread of life. What does it mean to give the bread of life in a hungry world? And that leads us to the second point. And this also sounds obvious. Jesus offers himself through us. Jesus offers himself through us. And what this means is he is the bread and I am not. Let me help you with this. Let me just say that one in a different way. He is the bread, and Chap is not. I can't feed you. I don't have the capability to get over my own brokenness, my own self, to be able to give you the bread you need to be sustained and to thrive. I can't do that. I can't be bread to you. But what I can do is trust him enough to let him soften me, to let him realign my priorities, my commitment, my vocation, so that he can actually work through me. That's really the point. In fact, I don't know how many of you have heard of Oswald Chambers. This is a guy that's pretty well-known theologian that's got this devotional that's way too famous. Almost nobody ever mentions him because he's way too famous and everybody's read him anyway. It's called My Utmost for His Highest. It's absolutely great. It's not that everything's perfect. It's not the Bible, but it's doggone close for some people. On September 2nd, because that's how this thing is arranged, Oswald Chambers says this. Just read the first line that comes up on the screen. Jesus did not say, whoever believes in me shall realize the blessing of the fullness of God. Okay, stop reading. Sorry, as a teacher, I didn't mean to do that to you. But oops. B+, most of you, okay? Jesus did not say, whoever believes in me shall realize the blessing of the fullness of God. That's how a lot of us, as we're skirting across the surface of life and faith, actually think that God's blessing, God's chosenness is about me. Is that He has blessed me, He has filled me, yay, this is awesome, and I'm going to give testimony all over the world. Look what God's done for me, I'm incredible. That's not what He says. In fact, He turns that whole idea of life being about me at the center upside down. Now we can read on. He does not say, whoever believes in me shall realize the blessings of the fullness of God. But whoever believes in me, out of that person shall escape everything he or she receives. Our Lord's teaching is always, ready for this is a great word, anti-self-realization. Slow down a little bit. Take that one in. Jesus' teaching is always anti-self-realization. It's always not about my development, but about the gift for someone else. That's His purpose. He goes on. His purpose is not the development of a person. His purpose is to make a person exactly like Himself. And the characteristic of the Son of God is self-expenditure. If we believe in Jesus, that's a big if. We believe in Jesus, it's not what we gain, but what He pours through us that counts. It is not that God makes us beautifully rounded grapes. I'm becoming more and more rounded as I age. But that He squeezes the sweetness out of us. That is the secret of life, if there is one. And it's really not a secret anymore because Jesus made it quite obvious. The point of His coming and choosing us and blessing us is not so that we can be beautifully rounded grapes, but that we can be squeezed into the sweetness of His work in the world. Isn't that marvelous? Now, and puts it this way, our greatest fulfillment lies in giving ourselves to others. Our greatest fulfillment in life is when we are squeezed and we give ourselves to others. And I'm going to give props to good old St. Andrews and to you guys, because that's what this church is about and what it's been about for a long, long time. This church has been about somehow Jesus Christ pouring in and through us. For example, last week on Friday night, a week ago Friday night, we had this thing here called Night to Shine, where we partnered with the Tim Tebow Foundation. He played football for a few weeks. And he's playing baseball too, so that's awesome. But he's got this great foundation, an incredible vision to do something magnificent for kids with special needs and young adults with special needs and their families. These are families that feel so discarded and so disconnected. These are kids that maybe have never walked a step in their life. Maybe they've never been able to hear a word spoken or a song sung. Maybe they just don't have the cognitive ability or the physical ability to be like other kids and young adults. And so I'm so grateful that the Tim Tebow Foundation came up with this idea of Night to Shine around the country. So hundreds of churches provided this opportunity. It's a very sophisticated thing. And our congregation, way to go St. Andrews, partnered with other congregations here, the W Church kind of in town, and a couple of others, and Young Life's Capernaum Project, which is a branch of Young Life for kids with special needs, all came together on our campus a week ago Friday, and there were almost 300 volunteers. Most of them were St. Andrews people. And there were about 80 of these kids and young adults, and they came for the night of their lives. These are kids that would never be asked to a prom or a homecoming dance. And yet, the volunteers, each kid had a buddy that danced with them and sang with them, did karaoke, that walked with them through this incredible evening. All their families were given an amazing dinner downstairs while the event was going on upstairs in Darrenfield with a live jazz band there. Incredible experience, and all these kids. And then the pinnacle of the night, where each one each one got crowned. Each one was crowned king or queen. The young woman who had never heard anything spoken because she was deaf, for the first time in her life, received a crown saying she was queen. And the applause went wild as the balloons dropped in Darren-Field Hall. And then the young man who had never had a date before danced up a storm, and he couldn't stop. And his family members afterwards were talking about, how was it? How was it? And he said, I'm the king. Yes, clap for this. Oh my gosh, you guys. We participated with a bunch of other believers, not getting any credit for it, in order to be squeezed into the lives of these ordinary discarded kids and families. That's who we are. That's what gives hope to the world. That's the bread of life, moving into the places where most of the world simply doesn't even take notice. And then that same weekend, on Saturday morning, Saturday and Sunday, 150 of our women went away to be at the women's retreat, where they had way too good a time. They didn't even get to tell us all that went on there because it was way too great. How many of you actually went to the women's retreat? Several of you did, and most of you still can't raise your hand anymore because you're just, wow. And here's what's great about the women's retreat, is 150 women came there, not so they could be bread to each other, but so that they could open themselves up to Jesus being bread in their midst. So as they would be together and pray together and laugh together and sit together, just by their openness and connection to one another, the bread of life poured out in the midst of those 150 women. Way to go, St. Andrews. That's who we are. That's what it means to live the life of the beloved, is not to be bread so we get the credit. Not to think we're great and some big shots. We fly through life where we go, yeah, we're going to be nice, we're going to give. We're going to give time, we're going to give money, we're going to give even of ourselves. No. Because we're not the bread of life. We get the great blessing and the gift of being available as the bread of life flows through us to a dark and hungry world. But here's the real final thing of the reason we did Life of the Beloved, is how do we actually live that way? A Night to Shine, awesome. Women's retreat, and so many other things we do. Our missions fair a couple weeks ago. But how do we actually do this? And here's the final point, is the bread of life is given by way of brokenness. The bread of life is given by way of brokenness. First, the bread of life, Jesus saying this in John 6, knew that in order for him to actually fulfill his calling as the bread of life, he had to suffer and then to die on the cross. The cross is a scandal because it shows that the way the bread of life conquers all that tears us down is by suffering and dying on the behalf of the beloved. And that's not only true of Jesus Christ, that is true for us as well. See, most of what I do, if I'm going to try to do something nice, if I'm going to be given, is I do out of my expertise. I do because I've worked at it. I do because of my experience or my history or training. I do most of what I do out of my strength so I can do a good job and make a difference in the world. But the way that I love, the way that I touch, the way that I truly make myself available so someone receives the bread of life is through my brokenness, not my strength. The work I do through my strength, which lifts me up and keeps me shooting across the surface. But the love I have to give is the love that comes from the deepest place of where I am broken, where I am vulnerable, where I make myself available to be a buddy to a disabled girl so that she can be crowned queen. See, it's not my vulnerability where the power of Christ comes out. In fact, I've got this up here because I want to say this right. The power of Christ's love does not come through my vulnerability. It's not in my vulnerability. Power of Christ's love is Jesus shining through my vulnerability. To be given is to allow the Holy Spirit to take me to places where I so desperately need to be healed, so that He can shine through those places and I'm available for Him to be bread of the world. That is the beauty and the gift of the gospel, is that He takes our broken hearts, our broken places, and our vulnerability, and He feeds the world. 2 weeks ago, I told you guys that my daughter Katie was expecting her second granddaughter, our third granddaughter. And so Katie and Ben had a little Hallie, who's 2.5. And he's a doc, a really good one, brilliant guy. And he and Katie were pretty sure that this baby's going to come early. So Katie said, Dee, would you come up? She called her mom, which is accurate. And said, Mom, would you come up on the 1st of February? So Dee went up on the 1st of February to be available to help out with Hallie as Katie is having this second child, a girl. And so Dee went up there, and I said 2 weeks ago, boy, I hope I make it, because they're sure it's going to come any minute now. And so I talked about that here, and I had to do work all week. So finally on Thursday, I was able to get out of here, and I got up there, and man, I made it, yay. We're there Thursday, Friday, nothing. Okay, went back and gave them a little space as a family. Snowed like crazy, power went out. We had an interesting time, nothing. Went back up to their house because they said, we think it's on. And so we drove back up to be with them. And this is Tuesday or Wednesday of last week. And hard contractions. She's totally thinking this is it. We get up there, nothing, nada. And my flight was Wednesday to come back here because I have the great privilege to get to be with you guys, my family. You're the St. Andrew's family, our church family. And I get to go to a congregation celebration today after this service. Yay! So do you if you're a member, because you promised you would. All right, just a little reminder, and so my flight was on Wednesday, and I just was going to miss it and maybe go back and see the baby after we're done with congregational meeting and everything. So, but then they canceled my flight because of the snow, and I couldn't get out till the next Thursday. We're thinking maybe the Lord did that. Baby'd come, and went Thursday, and nothing. So I get in the plane. I get here Valentine's Day, 11 o'clock. Brandon picks me up from the airport on Valentine's Day. Sorry, Abigail, if you're here. Oops. And I finally get to bed. Next morning, 6:45, Dee goes, it's real, it's on. I'm going, dang it. But then we have what's called the internet. And at 1:35, I walked into the hospital in Everett, and I was able to see Ben and Katie. She was in the last stages of her labor. I was able to kiss and pray with Katie and Ben, and I got to be there in the hospital. Dee was with Hallie and waiting around 4:08 on Friday afternoon. I got to be there for the birth of Naomi Grace. So it was unbelievable. There she is. She's way cuter than her granddaddy. And there's Dee and me and Hallie, her older sister. And I'm holding that little one. I got to tell you, I'm a good granddaddy. We come from Tennessee stock. Maybe you know that by the way I say restaurant. And Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, that's how you actually say it if you're from the, salt of the earth. and I did the modern American granddaddy thing. I was I got to hold her. It's about 45 minutes after she's born. I'm holding her. And so I ordered immediately, when we did it right then, the DNA test. Hold it, lumbar puncture. That's the way to get it out of there. And I'm holding her. She's about 7 pounds, 8 ounces, and I'm holding her. And we do the DNA test because we had to make sure what she was gifted at. And we had to prepare ourselves because that's important now, because really she had nothing of worth to share with the world. She's just this little kid. She's just born. And so as I'm holding her, we're doing a DNA test. I got the tutor to get her into the best preschool in Everett. We actually also signed her up for a special kind of sports program because we wanted to make sure that everybody knew that this little girl, Naomi Grace, offered something to the world. And it's something, I'm holding her and I'm thinking, there's no reason why you're valuable. Because you haven't kicked a ball yet. You haven't taken a test yet to compare yourself to others and think you're something. You haven't had anybody be attracted to you physically yet. Oh, some say you're cute, but you know. And you've done nothing, Naomi Grace. You're not giving bread to anybody. But I didn't do that. Of course I didn't do that. Because as I held this little 7 pounds, 8 ounces of pure vulnerability with nothing that we value as grown-ups in a world gone mad to offer me, Jesus Christ fed me the bread of life in and through little Naomi Grace. Because as I held her, all of the pretense, all of the striving, all of the hiding, all of the worry melted away because Jesus Christ gave me the gift of himself in and through the vulnerability of this tender, beautiful little girl. That's who you are. You are that precious child. You are that tender, vulnerable gift of God to the world, that is not you that is bread, but you become the way that God shines his light and gives his bread to a hungry world. Oh, bless you. Oh, know that you are, as John said last week, you are precious to our God and you are his beloved. Let's pray.